everyone, and we're recording in progress. So we're going to get underway. As far as I have no way of knowing, do we have people in the audience? Well, 19 there must be. Okay, so and welcome visitors. We're looking forward to reviewing our two upcoming minutes and then into our agenda. We've noted the time we started, and so let's go right into the meeting's call to order. And first action item is approval of the DAC meeting summary for November 10th, 2021. Are there any objections to be made about said? Yes, Anita, please.
Yes, there are a couple. Well, there's one message that was expressed at that meeting. Actually, I was the one who talked about it, and it didn't come through necessarily clearly on the meeting summary. So I sent Jessica wording that I thought would be more complete, and I can read it right now. If that's how you do this thing. I don't really know how you're supposed to do this.
Well, I'm not an expert, but it seems to make sense that if we don't know what the change is, we can't say approved as amended.
Okay. So this would be the meeting November 10th, under DAC member reports. And with my name, it says a certain thing. And what I'd like it to say is, Anita has heard a concern from people in her area that the Concord project designs and discussions don't have any focus on the park and how it can serve as an extension of the library designed together with the library.
Very good. And as a point of clarification, it's not what you'd like it to say. You think that's a better representation of what was said? Because I read your note to Jessica and you actually went back and rewatched the video.
I rewatched the video, yeah.
Okay. Because I've sometimes wanted to change what the minutes said, but that's what I said.
I understand.
Okay. Any other corrections or additions for that said agenda for November 10th? Hearing none, and the minutes will now be approved as corrected. Next, we'll discuss the agenda or the summary for November 17th. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes or summary? Is your hand still up, Anita?
It's up again.
Okay, I looked away. So please go ahead.
Okay. In the same vein, there was something that in the public comment, Chips Janger said that I also felt needed to be a little more full from what he said. And I looked at the videos and I've talked to him twice. So I have some wording here that I'd like to have in the summary. And the wording is, Chips Janger does not like the complete lack of emphasis on the design of the park. Wants this park planned in conjunction with the library to be a working part of the library. For a long time in the unincorporated areas, we have been asking for, but not getting more first-rate parks. Another big concern is that we've been talking about building a community center, but it is turning into a sports center instead. And if you go back and look through the video, you can see why I put those sentences together.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any objections to making the suggested corrections or addition, whichever you call it? Okay, hearing none, the minutes stand approved as amended. So our next item is first of all, I want to let the people in the audience know that those wishing to speak on a specific agenda item, please, during the public comment period, please indicate in the Zoom chat, and I believe it's Jessica will be watching that, and will call on you during that time period. First item is the Boardman property naming update.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll give the update on that. All of the DAC members, you should have gotten an email with a few items that were attached, a postcard, a flyer example. I think some verbiage for Facebook posts. We want to say that effort has already been successful. Remember, the nominations are open until December 27th at the close of business, 6 p.m. that day, or maybe we said 5:30. I'd have to check on that. To date, though, we've already gotten 22 submissions. And that does not include, we are just now getting out the Spanish language versions of most of the print stuff that'll be going out through the neighborhood as well, or throughout the district. So hopefully that will bring in some more submissions as well. So we think that it's going well so far. We'll see what the final results come in after the closing date.
Great. And as a point of clarification, it on the website and elsewhere, it says for 5 p.m. on the 27th. Okay,
thank you. My mind blanked on what time we had said.
Sure. I just wanted to let the people in the audience or other people
thank you
hear the straight scoop. And good. So looking forward to that working its way through, and then we will hear some results specifically in our January meeting, as far as what's been gathered and what the summary of all that is. So our next item is a budget report from Director Mike Bork and Finance Director Elizabeth Gomez.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to say a couple of things before I turn it over to Elizabeth. But this is the first time that, as we're producing these things, these are the first times I'm seeing them as well, just as the process of evolution. And so the financial report that you see before you tells a story. I don't think it really tells the story that I want you to be able to see. So future iterations of these quarterly reports will look different and hopefully provide a bit more of a realistic picture of our operations versus just the budget numbers as they're reflected in the budget documents. And so we'll tackle that on the next iteration. But I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. She's going to lead the discussion and answer any questions that you might have. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mike. I hope you had time to read through it. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but we do have a summary, the first sheet, and it talks about the 5 different funds that we track. So we track the general fund, which is the fund that property tax revenue goes into, and all of our operating expenses are made from. We have 3 SDC funds, which are the 3 zones right now. And those track the money that comes in from the SDC charges, interest that may accumulate, and then transfers. SDCs are transferred to capital projects after expenses are made. So you would see that in that budget. And then our final fund is Asset Development Fund, which is a fund that is for capital projects and for capital repair and replace. We had a change of our chart of accounts this year, and so a lot of our funds were more collective. We used to have a fund specifically for capital repair and replace and for capital projects, so you can see the difference in that, and we rolled those up together this year. Next year we might have something different as we continue to separate from business and community services. Did you have any questions for me on these?
Okay, in order of button pushing, see that Commissioner Savas has his hand up.
Let Ben go ahead first.
Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Paul. For some reason, I don't have a meeting packet and I looked on the calendar and all I have is the agenda. Is this information in a meeting packet that people are looking at and not me?
I had a similar issue and they found out that the completed packet was sent out later, and I also think it's on the website.
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's 46 pages long.
Oh, I'll catch up.
Yeah, you want to take a little, we'll take a little recess and be back.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, carry on.
All right, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I have something I want to talk about, but I'm going to hold off until everyone's spoken. But I do want to ask Mike one question, or Elizabeth, and that is, Mike, when you mentioned that this isn't, you meant some kind of reference that you didn't like what you saw or how it's put together. Was that format you were speaking to?
Format and I guess content or how what's being shown. So for instance, what we see in this quarterly report is basically derived directly from the budget, the annual budget. What it doesn't show, and what I hope to show in the future, and my understanding is what we've shown to the DAB in the past, but I think it's been the distant past, is showing more operational breakdowns. So being able to see the budget not just by big chunking category of recreation, which includes all the different functions, but seeing how an actual kind of quarterly up to the minute as much as possible, the aquatic center, the Concord building, the park maintenance functions, and have them broken out so that, to me, that tells a more real story. When you add all of those things up, that should all still add up to the same amounts as what you're seeing before you, just told in a more operational sense, which I think to me is more usable for advocates for what we do, like you all.
Right. So you're really talking about just a greater level of detail. I mean,
Yeah.
another one level down or two levels down.
Exactly.
Detail. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I have just one question and I'm done for now. And I'll just speak up a little bit later when Grover and everyone else has spoken. And that is, Elizabeth, do you see any anomalies or any problems with the finance? I mean, Mike has, I'm being respectful here. If Mike wants to jump in first, that's fine. I don't want to pin you down to anything, but is there, my concern coming out of the last meeting we had, or a couple meetings ago with the Board of Commissioners, was with this rough number of being $200,000 on the edge of black or red, so it seemed, and I used the words dire here a couple weeks ago or a week ago. I just want to just ask anyone, whether it's Mike wants to answer it first, but just want to know if there's any anomalies or anything in what you presented tonight that sticks out to you.
Elizabeth, if you want to take a crack at it, and I can fill in any blanks.
Okay, I think that one big thing is the effect of the COVID pandemic on our programs and our facilities, which were closed down for a majority of a year and a half. So you'll see in our budget, and you'll also see when our audit is done in the next week or two, you'll see that our revenues are down, our operating revenues are down, but our operating expenses reflect that as well. So we did our best to balance the expenditures based on the current revenue that we were receiving. So we closed programs, we put staff on lack of work notices, closed our facilities, we drained the pool, things like that. So you'll see that in the budget. We're just coming out of that. We're just starting to ramp our programs back up as much as we can. We also received funding, as you know, from the CARES Act that helped us a lot through the year as reimbursement for expenses for personnel and for materials and services. To see that as well. So I think that's the biggest thing, is the effect of COVID and how it's still affecting us.
Okay.
And the only thing I would add on to that is when we're looking at future forecasting, which we're just starting to do for the budget for this upcoming year. What we're seeing is, each major category of spending has an expected percentage or partial percentage, depending on what it is, increase each year. This year, personnel services are really going to have a big impact on our budgetary costs. We're just now, I mean, this is, and Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, this is one of the first years that we're experiencing the loss of revenue from Happy Valley. And that is, also part of the factor of what puts us into less of a stable position than we were even a few years ago. And so, all of those factors, a multi-percentage increase in personnel expenses, everything else, cost of just doing business going up, kind of across the board in nearly every category. Those are the things that, knowing how much we're walking on the wire between our expenses and our revenues this year, or what we've got into the budget this year, and looking at what our revenue is looking like for next year, which doesn't look all that great, and our expenses are definitively going up by multiple percentage points at least. We just don't know what that actually is yet. We just have a few numbers that have started coming in. That's where we have this hesitancy, where pretty much anything that's additional costs in next year's budget aren't supportable at this point. We're going to have to figure out how to look at how to figure out what we need to do to keep just chugging along, knowing that the community is expecting more out of us. And so that's the best way to say our kind of our future financial position. It's not where we're not going to be able to maintain parks next year, but we're really struggling figuring out how to expand our services, knowing that we've got some of these costs that we have to bear. We've got to have the personnel, the personnel increases are coming through. So we're trying to balance, knowing that our revenue is going to be impacted still this upcoming year, knowing that our expenses are definitively going to be going up. That's where I'm really nervous in this budgetary time. And until we really start getting much more into developing next year's budget and getting some of these forecasted numbers from the county and from these other places, we won't know more. I just know that it's going to be a very difficult job presenting a good balanced budget this year, through nothing more than cost increases in basically every category.
Well, thank you. I'll comment a little bit later about another thing I picked up on, but I'll just wait till everyone's finished.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And I keep having to remind myself that while I thank you all for having me be chair, I'm also a representative. And so I have that hat on, and that's the thinking I was doing before we had this committee, et cetera. So first thing I want to sort of go along with, and I appreciate what you just said, Mike, in response to that. I'm very much interested, and maybe everyone isn't, but I am, and all my years on boards, I want to see another few levels down, and I appreciate your focus on that. And if that's what Elizabeth was expecting you, and that's totally fine. But based on what you just said, and I'm really looking forward to more depth of knowing how it breaks out, and to look at where the costs are, and where the revenues are, and where the costs are, and noting increases, et cetera. So that's piece one. Piece two, I have, Elizabeth, I have some simple questions about the actual charts. So I'm on the one for the general fund. And I'm just curious, and maybe Mike could be the one to answer it, I don't know, but I'm looking at the amount that we have for contingency. And is that a mandated amount, or is it supposed to be a percentage of budget? Or, because being new to this, that's a question that came to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should have a 5% contingency, at least. We did increase that contingency last year because we weren't sure what the pandemic was going to, what you know, what would be happening. So we wanted to have that amount available. The prior year, we put some into a restricted fund. So when we restrict it, you can't touch that money for a year, no matter what. With contingency, if your money is in contingency, it's sort of like a savings account. And if you find the need to spend that, whether it's on, you know, if you know, something dire happened and the pool flooded or something like that, we would be able to do a supplemental budget and use those funds from the contingency.
Well, and it is well, you mentioned 5%. Of what number is it a percentage of, if that's taking some rule of thumb? Because when I look at the total required revenue, it looks like it's a third.
It's 5% of operating expenditures. So, you know, it doesn't have to be that. It can be more, but it should be at least 5% of operating expenditures.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this, it says the contingency fund reserve and future expenditures is $5.33 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and when I look at our total requirements for the year, it's $16.33 million. So that's, in my math, a lot more than 5%. It's like 6 times 5%. So is there a reason that it is that big in the budget, not in how the money's actually coming in and so on and so forth? And I don't know who to answer if I'm the only one who cares, okay, but I'm trying to figure out, that's a lot of money sitting there, and I want to know what guided us to being there.
Well, in the budget process, we budgeted. We were very careful in how much we budgeted for revenue, first of all, because we weren't sure if programs would be going. And remember that we're doing these budgets, you know, 6 to 8 months before the year starts. So we are doing our best estimates as to revenue and expenditures. This was a larger amount in contingency, like I said, because we were not sure if we would need that money during the year. You can budget that money to be transferred to capital repair and replace if we decide to do that, but we kept it in the general fund to make sure that if anything happened worse than what did happen, that we would be able to, you know, make sure that we had the money to pay the bill.
Okay.
We had a loss of about $1.8 million in revenue last year because of COVID.
And about the same from Happy Valley leaving as well, but I assume the expenses went down some. I don't know if there was a staff adjustment. So I don't know, it just, for me, not now, but going forward, Mike, or however, could we get at least a clarification of how we get to those numbers and where we want to steer going forward? And thank you very much for your answer, Elizabeth. So I had a couple other questions. I'm looking at now the Zone 1 budget, and when I was reading in the notes, note number 3 talks about that in 2014, there was an ordinance that approved and required that both zone-specific SDCs and SDCs and district-wide SDCs be deposited in a zone trust. And then it goes on to say that there was a change in zone boundaries for Zone 1 and Zone 2, and explains what those changes are. But in essence, it means the UGMA area of Milwaukee was transferred out of Zone 2 into Zone 1. And my question really is, when that boundary change took place, there must have been money somewhere in the SDCs. And I'm curious, did those funds that had been collected as part of Zone 2, did they then get transferred also to Zone 1 in that time period? If so, where would I find information about that? Because it's got it in the note, but it doesn't explain the where.
Mhm.
And
Mike, go ahead.
we can send you a breakdown. I know, I believe it's both Heather and Elizabeth worked on a breakdown, I believe, for Commissioner Savas on how that all transpired and kind of a timeline. So we can get that to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it greatly because it leads to several questions. I tried to do conjecture and I looked at the one for zone 2, and it shows a capital expenditure transfer out to other funds, and it's about $2.5 million. And I'm just curious. That was the question I wanted to ask you earlier, Elizabeth, in previous time, was to follow where the money that goes to transferred out. How do I find a way that I can follow where the money went, just as a general fiduciary responsibility as a community member, et cetera, and on this board? So I don't need the answer now, but that is what I was looking for and still am. And so if you want to send me that, that would be great. And then I could ask further questions beyond that. That would be great too.
Okay, yeah, this is probably not the best report to make those discoveries. It's not detailed enough.
Okay. All right. Well, those are all of my questions that I had on that. Is there anyone else that had a question? Because I did have one other one. So then with the change from from zones to sub areas, then when I look at zone 1, their system development charges for the UGMA is actually funding that is in sub area 4. Is that correct? Do I read that correctly? Like in the SDCs?
There's not a SDC tie between zones and sub areas.
True, but there's real money and real money. And so that real money that is in sub area 1 actually is money that is generated in sub area 4. And we're still in transition, but I just wanted to know, am I accurate in that observation?
I don't have where all the zones are in my mind. Heather or Elizabeth or I'm not tracking the difference because again, we collect based on the zones, but that's going to go away if you continue with the methodology direction. So it wouldn't matter if money is brought in zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3. It would have no bearing on the sub areas usage of that because we're going to a no zonal.
Okay.
So
Well, that means
we can find out for you.
I'd appreciate it because it fits in with my first question, or the question just before that is where the money from sub area 2 went when part of sub area 2 was moved to sub area 1, and it's actually to me the same piece of land that we're talking about. And so then when it's there, it's now in sub area 1, but now with our new changes, it will be sub area 4. And when does that change take place, and how does the money follow? And I don't expect an answer now.
The new change, no money is going to sub areas specific, Chair. When you remove the zones, it's district wide. So the intent of the sub areas is representation, not divvying out money.
I totally get that, but in the process, the money that is in sub area 4 is being, and if it's still there at the end, does any money that at the time we go from zones to no zones, does the money that's already in still have a history of where it was, or does it all get wiped clean and now it's all district money? All three of those questions are interrelated, and I don't need the answer now, but I hope what you're sending me will at least address some of that because it's a big question for me.
Well, it's two different questions though. You're asking about a transfer that happened back in 2014, and then how things might be affected when we remove the zones in 2021, and they're two different issues.
I don't see it that way, but we can talk more about that.
We can send you the explanation of the transfers and what happened in 2014 on that. Again, we've put that together previously, And if you want to have a side chat on the other question, because we want to make sure we get you the right information.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. I look forward to that. And so I have no more questions on that, and I see no more hands up.
I believe
So,
Commissioner Savas had wanted to have another.
Oh,
yeah, if there's no other questions, I want to make sure that everyone's covered before I just jump in. So, so if that's all right, Elizabeth, for the benefit of everyone in the room here, I was wondering if you could put up the general fund piece that's in the packet. The balance sheet.
I don't have, am I able to share my screen? I think Mike's saying something.
Heather, can you bring that up on the slides?
I just don't want everyone in the room to be lost without being
Give
able to
me
see
just
it.
a moment. Commissioner Savas, can you repeat what, which page you're looking at?
Is there a page number at the
it's
bottom of the
general
screen?
fund.
There is no page number,
213.
but it says General Fund 213 towards the top of the page.
Do you see my screen? Is this the one, the General Fund 213?
Well, that's not
You're
screen.
not the
the breakdown.
spreadsheet.
So scroll down one sheet, Heather.
There it is.
There we go. Thank you. So, Elizabeth, if you look over at the third column where it says projected, there you go, projected 6/30/2022. And I see that if you look at the beginning balance, you know, in the first column, it's 7.6 million, and the third column, it's 9 million. What's that? What new revenue is that? Is that the CARES Act or the ARPA money?
That's a variety of things. So we got the CARES Act. We received more in property taxes than we were assuming in the budget. So the first column is the budget, you know, which we that's a projection that we based on, you know, last January when we did the budget. The difference is, you know, money we received from the CARES Act, more received in property taxes than we were expecting. So we budget based on about 95% collection, and it was actually more than that. And we also, you know, we had less expenditures because we closed our programs and facilities. So it's just a sort of combined number of things that made that difference. So we are actually going into this year better than we assumed with our beginning fund balance.
Okay. Okay. So thanks for that clarity. I want to make sure that what I'm pointing out here is not, you know, is factored in here. So what I'm trying to point out here, Elizabeth, when I take if you look at the total resources line under resources there, where it says 16,352,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whether I take that number or I take the number in the third column, which is 17,311,000, if I subtract the beginning balance at the top that we just pointed out, it leaves 8,743,000 and 8,227,000 respectively in each of those columns, which is basically the total sum of the resources. Okay. If we go down the screen a little bit and we go down to the line where it says just for instance, subtotal, just to take out the contingencies, where it says subtotal, 10,569,000. See that? Okay. If I subtract those numbers or calculate those numbers and compare them, each of those lines, column 1 and column 3, indicates that there's approximately a $2 million or expenses are outpacing revenues by around 2 million. In the first column, I get 1.8 million. And in the third column, I get 2.2 million. So my question earlier about any anomalies, and with that extra cash flow coming in, the result's the same. And I looked at prior budgets for the revenue stream, and the revenue stream obviously changed a little bit with the withdrawal of Happy Valley. I totally understand that, and I do remember talking to Laura Zentner about this at that time, and I asked her this question. I said, "Geez, you know what are we going to have to cut in order to keep and calculate in that loss of revenue to make sure we offset, those expenditures and so forth?" So I'm just concerned because, and maybe I just want to, again, the health of the district is important to all of us. And the way the budget's laid out, if you look at the NCPRD budget, it's a nice, beautiful budget, nice document, and it always has been for years, but it doesn't really lay it out as simple as this balance sheet does. And it's just broken apart in so many pieces. I won't say impossible, but it's extremely difficult to actually get a good view. But this balance sheet helps that. But do you see what I see?
Yes, and in the past 2 years, we used to do a transfer from the general fund to capital repair and replacement, and it was anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. We have stopped doing that, so that $500,000 to $1 million is no longer coming from the general fund to capital repair and replace. That was one of the things we did to make up for that loss of Happy Valley's revenue. And we paid the debt off. As you know, we're right now debt free, and that debt was about a $500,000 payment each year. So those two things nearly made up for the Happy Valley loss in revenue, but expenditures are outpacing revenue, and it will be very obvious next year as well when we have a huge increase in personnel services. Our capital repair and replace, since we aren't making a transfer to that from the general fund, that balance is depleting. So we don't have that fund balance earning anything for our capital repair and replace. So we really need to have serious discussions about how we're going to fund that going forward.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I'm sure these are rough numbers, and maybe the way I did the calculation maybe is not, I'm not looking for a penny for penny kind of a thing here. I'm just kind of rounding numbers, but it does look far more dire than 200,000. If it is in the neighborhood of 2 million, we've got to do something substantial. And I think this advisory committee needs to be able to be helpful with that, and how and where we recalibrate to make sure we're in the black.
And we're just now starting the budget efforting, and I'm going to be delving into that with each of the individual managers, and picking apart our operations and seeing where we've got efficiencies, where we've got areas that could be cut, and then bringing to the DAC really what the public impact would be to any of those, what the implications would be. I don't see with our personnel impact or personnel cost increases how we can do business the same way that we've been doing business, and that's been part of the overall message. I don't have a solution right now. I'm hoping that as we delve into the more finite details of the daily budget, that we can discover some of these efficiencies and savings, and bring our expenditures more in line, and then look at the creative ways that we can boost our revenues. I mean, that's kind of the song of parks and recreation agencies everywhere. We're not really all that different. Our circumstances are unique, but that's where I need to have that chance to sit down with staff as we develop this next year's set of budgets. We just can't begin that work really until we get the initial documents from the county that have some of the initial forecasts. So it will be coming to you as soon as I have some idea of ways that and what our picture looks like. I'll be bringing it to the DAC.
Is that all that you had, Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, that was all. Just hoping we can just dig in that a little bit and make sure that next time we meet, we've got some, a better picture.
Right, and I echo that, Mike. I'd appreciate knowing that as soon as you have it ready, and on a regular and soon basis. Yes, Ben, you're up.
Oh, thank you. Seems like a lot of bad news. I'm curious, what's the nearest opportunity to go out to the public to change how we can actually fund some of these areas that are shortfalls? Because from what you're saying about going back and cutting budgets for maintenance, which probably, isn't going to help anything. The best thing is going to be generating revenue from the public. My understanding from what I've heard is that, our tax base for parks is like the lowest in the area. I mean, if people value parks in this area, we as a community need to step up and pay. What's the nearest and closest opportunity we are to change something, whether in a vote or whatever, and us as a board to help support that effort? And as people from the BCC, like Paul, I'm sure he's very much, there's a lot of stuff that's like very, very in the weeds that I don't understand. But what I do understand is that we don't have the money and we need to figure out ways to generate money. Can you speak on that behalf?
I can, yeah. And that's a great segue. We haven't had this discussion yet, but part of the time that I've been spending is as the new directors trying to figure out strategically how to get us to a point of more operational revenue, because that's, really it's two problems that we've got. In one sense, very basic. We've got capital revenue issues. That's funding of improvements and replacements and new projects. But then we also have the operational challenge, and that's where our tax levy is. So to answer your question and not get into too much detail, the two options, the one that I know Commissioner Savas has even spoken publicly about, is going out to a vote of the district, or I'm sure, actually, now that I say that, Commissioner Savas, correct me. I assume maybe is it a vote of the district or a vote of the county to separate as the district? You're
It's a
muted.
vote of the people.
Yeah, it is a vote of the citizens, the voters in the district.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Residents.
So the residents of the district, a separation vote where we would become a 266 entity, a special district, versus right now we're a service district of Clackamas County. So that would come with a separation from Clackamas County services also, which is an added cost and needs to be factored. But we would then, after a successful vote, have a vote for an actual elected board that would be an elected quasi or judicial entity, just like Tualatin Hills has and other districts. And part of the separation vote usually also includes a tax levy increase vote. So vote to separate and increase our levy, and then follow that up with a vote of to get the first incorporating board. That's option one, and unfortunately neither option is quick. We could go out to that as soon as we could find a sponsoring agency to fill out ballot information for us. I just don't have a high confidence right now of votability when we've got all of these projects that we need to kind of get moving forward and show the residents that we know how to do our jobs and are trying to do them to the best of our abilities. Option two is not doing a separation vote and still operating as a service district under Clackamas County, but going out for what's called a local option levy. If anybody follows any of the other Parks and Rec districts around in the area, Portland just did one. A local option levy is a 5-year sunsetted levy that's voted on by the residents, that has a whatever increase amount. So right now we're at 54 cents per valuation. Let's say we wanted to bump that to 75 cents. We would put out a 21 cent local option levy increase. It would give us an infusion of cash that has a sunset after 5 years. It would have to be renewed or done away with after that time. But that has some benefits where we may be able to do that a little quicker. We're still not getting our money, in an operational sense, cash in our pockets for about the same amount of time, which would be a couple of years out. And so that's where I've been trying to concentrate, is looking at what we can do in the future for this influx of cash, what I can do right now to kind of stem the tide of losses that we're incurring right now, and where is that kind of middle ground where we start tipping the balance back in the positive way. Politically, I know Commissioner Savas, he's spoken about, some of the more political, less financial reasons of being a separate district. I certainly understand all of those and agree with that. It's something that I think would well serve the residents of the district boundaries to be a separated district. But we need to build our internal advocacy and external advocacy first. And I hope to do that with things like improving some programs and potentially moving to Concord and starting to offer programs more out in the community, things like that, so that when it comes to a time to say, would we like to separate, there's the confidence of the voters that we can actually operate as a separate entity and be successful in our mission. Local option levy is a little more basic. We need money. Here's what this money would provide, in visual terms, explain to them what this additional tax levy, but we would be under the same operational setting that we are now as still a part of Clackamas County. So those are the two basic options moving forward for cash influx on the tax levy side. I'm not sure, and I would love to hear from you all either now or in future discussions, or if you want to send me an email, because it's really which way we want to take the approach. And there's pluses and minuses to both approaches, and there's timing issues. None of them are going to be done immediately, but we need to start planning now so that we can get these things in the books and in the plans and moving forward. So sorry, long answer to your short question, Ben.
Thank you very much.
It was a great question, and I have a couple of things to say about it, but I would, if anyone else would like to speak into this now, please do. Otherwise I will, because I have several things I want to say about that, and thanks for bringing it up, Ben. Okay, nobody else raised their hand. I'll continue. For me, I couldn't agree more with the things that have been said, and the only challenge and why so much work has been done over the last 2 years by a number of us has been to be able to broaden the number of people who would be inclined to vote for an increase. And to do that, the strategy that was laid out in the task force that met in January of this year, several of you are members, former members of that task force, and the point of it was to, one, get this group seated, but the bigger and more important part of it was to broaden the in the sub area representation so that people feel more connected. And what we're trying to do, and I will use the library district advisory committee as a model that's similar. Every library has a board, and that each board sends one of their board members to be on that district. Well, in this, I'm thrilled, and I've said this publicly before, that Milwaukee actually does have a board, and Ben, you're on that board, so you're here, and then Desi's on your county, on your city council, and so he's here. But for the rest of us, there is no tie to that supporting group and the importance of getting that kind of outreach. So that's why the idea of having friends of groups be able to grow and foster, et cetera, will allow more people, in my opinion, to be connected. And my last 25 years has been about public outreach and involvement to raise money and have people be included in it and feel that they're getting their money's worth. So that's what one of the things we have to look at. The other is the fact that out of the 105,000 people, we have, I just read on the website again, we have 32 parks in NCPRD. 22,000 people have 16 of the parks, and 83,000 people have the other 16 parks. And if you want to get enough votes to pass this, then you have to have enough people feeling that they're being served by it. And that is the gap that we think we need to do. Nobody's done wrong, but how are we going to do that and put focus on looking at equitably across the entire district? How is it? Because if the voters aren't feeling served, I don't see where they're going to step right up. Given our current reality, I'm glad we're all caught up. So that's all I want to say. I'm in total agreement that in the future, it'll be our best interest to be a standalone. We would be able to look at our own needs more specifically, as opposed to change hats on West, change hats on housing, change hats on, bless them for doing all that, but I don't know how they can do that and actually consider the needs quite the way an individual board would do. So thank you. No hands up. Next item. Anything else on the budget report? Okay, moving right along. Current capital project budget update. Heather.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm going to, we have the next 3 items I'm going to be talking with you, and I want to make sure we keep moving through things. So I will definitely look up for questions, but if you need to interrupt because something is just unclear, please feel free. And I know Grover's always monitoring really well for hands raised. But I have just a few slides for this capital projects update. Just to be clear, because we're using the word capital projects a couple of places, the word capital in a lot of places, this first update is really just a status update on the 9 projects that are in the adopted budget for this fiscal year 21-22 ending July 30th. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. These slides have the same content as what was set out in the packet, but we made a few graphic improvements. So they will look a little different, but it's the same information, just more easily readable. Now, can you see a screen that says FY 21-22 capital projects?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. So again, we have 9 projects in the adopted annual budget for this year, and I'm not going to read through these because I'm going to cover them on the next slides, but I just wanted to give you that summary. And I'm just going to go through them 3 at a time and give you some quick highlights. We have the master plan and CIP, which is the master plan is what we traditionally called it, and you'll hear us referring for the most part going forward to this as a system plan, which is just a reorientation in how we describe this. And also the CIP, which again is the capital improvement plan, and I'll try always to define those jargon terms, but please interrupt me if you ever need that. So December through February, we're starting on the interim CIP update, and we're starting with that item tonight. That's the last of our discussion items. And then January through March, we are doing the systems plan, scoping, and contracting. So we actually are already doing the research on that, but we'll be doing a more focused effort on that once we get the STC methodology and the CIP process a little bit underway. We can focus a little bit more on the scoping. I don't have a timeline beyond that, but basically once we are able to scope the project and get a request for proposals out there, we can bring on the consultant partner that can most specifically help our district. And as Grover and others have referred to, you know, we have a lot of work to do in thinking about what our district's going to look like and how we're going to get there. So it's really important who we partner with on this project. So we're going to spend our time scoping that well. The Trails Master Plan, that's January through March, and you'll notice it coincides here with this System Master Plan. And can you see my cursor when I use it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the Trails Master Plan was originally going to be separate, and we're combining them so that we have more efficiency in that process and more coordination between trails and everything else we do, because they're not truly separate, but they do deserve some separate focus. So we're tying them together a little bit better. The STC methodology, you're now somewhat familiar with. Most of you could join us on Monday for our special meeting, but we'll be gathering data December through January, getting all those important inputs over to our consultants so they can start working on the methodology, a draft. That draft methodology will come back to us and to you for review. The first time you see it will not be the last, because we'll need to do some tweaking and looking at the different levers. April through May, we'll be working to finalize it. And June through
Ben, do you want
August,
to interrupt or do you want to wait?
let me just get through this bullet and then
Sure, sure.
please. And then public notice and board approval June through August. So it feels like a little bit of a long time. We all kind of want to get on with this, but it is a process and it does have public requirements for public input and approval. So that's why a little bit longer than we'd like. But if we stay on track, we're quite confident that we can bring it to the board for approval by August.
Sorry
You want
about
me
that,
to pause
Heather.
there?
Yeah, Ben, did you want to interject now?
Yeah, not so much interject, but a question. Heather,
Mhm.
thank you. Hi, how are you doing, Heather?
Good, how are you, Ben?
Good. The Trails Master Plan, my understanding is that there was already a a consultant, Alta, selected and it stopped. Are you gonna go forward with Alta still with this timeline so you don't have to go through the RFP process and spend a lot of time, and then you'll very likely have a different consultant doing the system plan?
We haven't made that determination yet.
Oh.
And you're right. We did have a consultant selected. We didn't start the contract with them. And it was largely due to COVID and the challenge of doing engagement work and the fact that we were going to be embarking on this systems plan. So we don't know whether we will use the same consultant or whether we will go back and do it all as one package. So that's part of an important decision we need to make.
Wow. Do you know where you're leaning about combining the two or having them separate? Because Trails System Master Plan sometimes is a different scope and skill set as the Park System Master Plan, and you kind of have a really good consultant on board already for one.
Yeah, we're going to have to look at that, and that's we'll be exactly considering that very point. So even if we had a different consultant on it as a sub consultant, for example, that person would need to have the kind of trail expertise that a trail planning consultant has. So that won't be sacrificed.
Yeah, there's going to be multiple components to this systems plan, Ben, and we recognize that we're not going to find a one size fits all that's going to be able to do all of it. We're just trying to look at the benefits of combining the efforts, because there's a lot of shared data that yes, the trails plan and the systems plan are different in their outcome, but there's a lot of the data gathering that's all shared data. And so we're just trying to figure out, since there was that hiatus, A, can we re-engage with them, or do we have to go back out for procurement since a time has elapsed? And B, is it best to try and get somebody that's acting as more of a coordinator of consultants to put this true systems plan together? Because we want it to really be seamless unto itself, understanding that they're all different components, but to all have kind of continuity with each other. So we haven't made any determinations though yet. We're very early in that discussion.
All right, thanks.
And I will add just one other thing too, which is we know as an agency and as planners and even as designers, Ben, like yourself, that we can plan very differently for different parts of our system, but the members of our district, the people we serve, they're not necessarily going to differentiate between a trail and a park. So we do want to be able to deliver that ultimate product, for example, and process where we look at needs, and we can not kind of force people to artificially distinguish between one thing or another, or even have them work at odds. So I think really getting that scoped properly is really important, but not at the sacrifice of having someone who's really expert in trails. So we'll have a chance to talk more about that system planning effort coming up pretty soon. All right, can I?
Dave has his hand up. Do you have a question now, Dave?
Yeah, I was wondering, in this context, what's the difference between a trail and a parks plan? Why are they different?
Sorry, I'm trying to manage noise in my household. So they aren't, a system plan deals with a lot of different components, from rec facilities to trails to parks to all the other aspects, programming, ADA access. You can even roll a lot of things up into a system-wide plan. There's specific elements within our system like trails that are very distinct and that operationally are quite different to both plan for and manage. So it makes some amount of sense to split some things out. Ultimately, they're all related. And so when we plan for parks, we have different considerations than when we plan for trails. You know, it's the difference between providing parks in certain areas in certain ways with certain facilities versus having trails that are contiguous and thread throughout the district. They're just, you know, such different spatial elements, but they all need to relate to one another to be effective. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was wondering what is the trail in this thing? We have the, you know, the bicycle trail down there by McLaughlin, and we have the Springwater corridor. Are those the only trails we have, or is there something else on other trails besides that?
We have other trail segments in different places, like the Sunnyside area. We have trails within parks, you know, smaller, shorter trails. Like you think about some of the walking trails we have at North Clackamas Park or even at Kronberg Park. And the trail system plan aspect of the plan will really look at the segments and the longer corridors and how everything works together to benefit, you know, the residents and the system as a whole. There are some corridors that are potential to develop in the future as contiguous corridors, but they will require long-term coordination to piece together different easements and properties to make them, you know, continuous. So trail work is sort of it's a long-term planning effort to make those things come to fruition. But part of the trails plan is being able to be very definitive about our plan so that we can operationalize that work and take advantage of opportunities as they come up within an identified corridor. And I probably should leave it at that. You'll get me going and we won't cover anything else. But David, please come back to that if I've missed something. So let
Okay,
me
now
go.
we have Ben.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that the trails plan isn't necessarily about the trails you have, but the trails that you could have in the future that links all the parks and everything that's, you know, non vehicular related. So there's a lot of potential. And like you said, we don't have a lot of regional trails through our area, and hopefully that master plan could identify a broader connection throughout.
And it helps us work with partners. There's the county, there's the city of Milwaukee, there's Metro, there's the state. I mean, there's a lot of different partners, nonprofits that also have interest in trails. And that partnering is also where the funding usually comes in to make things possible. So a lot of the identification is also about figuring out how we can most effectively work with partners. So that's way down the road in kind of action steps and implementation, but that is why we do this kind of planning.
Great. Commissioner Savas.
I have a question. I don't know. I'd like to hear Mike's perspective and maybe Ben's perspective on this question. And that is, you know, it occurs to me in my major role at the county's transportation that we are certainly allocating a lot of money towards, you know, bike ped, and trails are often part of that. And we get transportation dollars to build trails. I don't necessarily think that we get those dollars for operational stuff, if those dollars are there for operational, but I would assume that now that the requirements often for some kind of a path, if you will. My question is there any examples where there's revenue sharing or where maintenance and or capital is shared to build, because they are essentially transportation corridors as well as recreational corridors?
I would say in my experience, I agree with your statement, but practically, you know, DOTs and other agencies are kind of in the same boat as we are. They're doing as much as they can with what they've got. And, you know, it really comes down to the agreements that are reached before construction even begins of who would be in charge of maintenance. And I've seen the full spectrum of public projects, whether they're corridor or public art or green space, you know, places, you know, and really it just depends on what the capacity of the different agencies are, you know, to take on the ongoing operational costs and shared expenses of that. usually it falls to the agency that whoever the land or the authority falls to. And yeah, so I mean, it's not unheard of, but usually that's done kind of at the outset of a development project. I've not seen it done retroactive.
Okay, thank you. Anna, you have your hand up.
Yes, this is sort of on the same subject or related. Two community members recently have complained or have concerns about safe routes to parks. One of them was saying that if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist trying to get to North Clackamas Park, it's very unsafe on the roads that lead into it. And another one lived near the wetlands and, you know, within walking distance, but had to take her kids in a car to get to the wetlands because it wasn't safe on the roads that are immediately feeding into that site. So I don't know, like you said, I don't know which agencies handle this or if you coordinate or partner, but it's something that needs to be, I think safe routes to parks need to be acknowledged the way safe routes to schools are being acknowledged.
Thank you. Ben?
I was gonna go back to Paul's question about transportation funding. Trails as a transportation network, like the trolley trail could be considered, or Springwater Corridor can be considered, are very easy, low-hanging fruit for big transportation dollars. Like the park funding stuff that we've talked about is just pennies compared to like what you can get on a federal level for trail systems. Like this transportation ballot that's been fumbling around in Congress forever, that's finally, I think, getting forward. You know, if you want to be aggressive and get money for within the park district, you go after transportation dollars like for trails, and it's unfortunately we won't have that trails. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, I've already had several conversations with our I'm not sure if they're lobbyists or folks that work for the county on behalf of and keep their eyes on legislation. We had talked about what we could submit for federal earmark projects, as well as the infrastructure dollars that are going to be coming through. And actually, of the, I think, 8 or 9 categories in the infrastructure package, I've identified at least 4 of those categories that we might be able to identify money, both for transportation, for some energy efficiency, EV plug-in stations, looking at fleet replacement. There's some money for converting vehicles to electric. So there's several areas, transportation corridor being one that the lobbyists thought would play very well, both for earmarks and for the infrastructure. So yeah, we're trying to stay on top of that as much as we possibly can.
Okay, I think we got through all the questions. Heather, are you back up?
I'm back up. So the next 3 are starting with Milwaukee Bay Park. We're launching the design and updating the cost estimate this month, which is really exciting. We have Two Ink Studio back on board, and we have a pre-construction partner, Lease Crutcher Lewis. They're a contractor, so they're going to be involved early so that we really have a handle on costs and we aren't surprised and we can right size our project. January through March, based on that information, we start targeting our redesign and value engineering toward our actual budget, so we don't end up in a place that's not feasible. And then in January, we'll seek approval of a funding agreement. It's already been approved by the city and it needs to come to the board. So that's tentative for January, but that's the last I heard from our leadership. The Scott Park Master Plan, that's going to be coordinated with a city-led effort. The city got the American Rescue Plan Act funding for work on several parks, including Scott Park. So we're going to continue to be a coordinating partner on that project and are really looking forward to being able to give input on some of the long-term considerations for that, especially relate to management and maintenance. in terms of the design. And then the Concord project, you guys have had a lot of updates on. I won't go into much detail there, but December to June is when we're going to be both exploring the alternative design options and confirming the funding availability and establishing timelines. So you're going to be kept abreast of that process as well. And then the last three are on our capital project list for FY 21-22, but they're all three on hold. This Jennings Lodge Elementary is a school property that we have a approved agreement with the Oregon City School District to do some development work on that site in their area as a long-term use of their property, but it's on hold just essentially due to staffing shortage. We also are wanting to look at ball fields, but again, we're putting that on hold until we have more clarity from our systems plan about how to pursue that, particularly given that there's a shortage of land in an urbanized area. And then Dogwood Park is also on hold. You might be familiar in South Downtown Milwaukee, there's a development that's already gone through land use approval called Coho Point. And we wouldn't be doing anything in that park until we have, until the development has moved forward. But that would be a partnership with the city of Milwaukee as well. So we've talked with them about opportunities in the future, but nothing is really furthered yet. So that's not moving forward yet, but we hope it will over the next couple of years as that development moves forward. So that is all I had for that.
Yeah, well, I had a quick question on the Jennings Lodge Elementary School. I know that is in the heart of where I live, and it's also in our sub area. The opportunity to include the community in that design and so on and so forth, is that part? I got it on hold, so I'm not trying to push it off a hold, but will the community be involved in some of the first phases of looking at the values, looking at what the needs, what needs to be addressed? Because I mean, that truly is, like in our part for making recommendations, it has to be, does it meet the needs, the concerns, and the desires of the local constituents? And then we find out from local constituents, and then we can speak to the DAC, and then we can make a recommendation to the governing board. Is that in that process, or is it just nobody's touched it yet? We don't know where we are on that, because the idea is it going to be a ball field, or is it going to actually have trees and paths and barbecue pits, or I don't know.
Nothing's been decided on it yet.
Yeah, and not decided is one thing, but I meant is the process to get the input, because I want to use the Concord complex task force. I mean, that's a 3-year process, much bigger project, I understand, but it included lots of public input, and I just want to make sure we're focusing on that. And we don't have to answer it now, but that's my 2 cents representing my resident constituents. The other was back on the SDC methodology for the Milwaukee Bay Park piece. Has the DAC, because you said it's going to go to the board, but has the DAC had a chance to recommend that yet?
What are you referring to? The funding agreement? Mike, do you want to speak to that?
My understanding from Gary was at last month's meeting, he was asking for comments from the board, but wasn't seeking a vote. And I believe the instructions at last month were if there were comments to send them through us or to Gary directly. I'm not sure if anything's changed. I'm not aware of anything changing. That was my understanding from the meeting last month.
I just want to clarify, my question was about whether the DAC will actually have a chance to, we certainly don't approve, but that we'd recommend approval or not. That was my question.
My impression was that that Gary was seeking comment to the Board of County Commissioners from you all individually. I didn't get an impression of a group vote. I mean, that would be a vote to recommend or not.
It certainly would.
I didn't get that impression from him.
Okay, well, when I look at our charter, I think it's included. Commissioner Savas, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I was I can check with Gary as well. I was under the impression that because of the SDCs and that won't say uncertainty, but lack of clarity as to I guess maybe perhaps what the study will reveal may have a factor, or something around that might have a factor on whether or not SDCs or the amount of SDCs allotted is something that of concern. But I do recall that it was something that the DAB at the time was assured that they would have an opportunity to discuss that funding and make a recommendation. But I believe that was the direction, but I'm happy to check back with the district administrator, Gary Schmidt, as to, but my impression was that was when we got the finances figured out, that was something that we were going to seek a recommendation from you all, the DAC.
Great. I
I
look forward to hearing
verify
that because it does clearly fit our charter that we would make recommendations on funding commitments of that size.
We'll get back with you and we'll have something in January.
Thank you. Okay, back to you. Oh, no, another hand went up. Ben, go ahead.
I just wanted to advocate for a park that's not in my zone, the area that is next to New Urban School. I'm curious where the conversations are with the school district in getting that parcel to develop for a neighborhood park. It is seriously an awesome opportunity for the entire district, and not only just the district because it's along the trolley trail, so people would enjoy it and have a lot of economic benefit for Oak Grove. I know that it's probably not here on the 21-22 capital project status, but it certainly would be nice that that is an elevated conversation because it's in a much needed area. And I just am advocating hardly for it. And even though I live in Milwaukee, I know how important this park would be for the entire district and also for Oak Grove.
Excellent. And I second that. Wrong choice of words. I concur.
Ben, if you could reach out to Heather and we can chat more about that.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'd like to have us all hear about how we can get to things like that, because I've also lived close enough and I'm around that. And I hear all the time from people who want to know both what the Jennings Lodge School and then also the New Urban School, both of them have grounds that are underutilized.
Yeah,
I see.
Chair, if I could just jump in real fast on that. Yeah, we sought both the park, not the park, the potential park that Ben's referring to, and the Jennings Lodge Park, both two different school districts, but basically property that is managed by both districts. And the New Urban was put on hold because of the construction. They actually used the park area for staging and mobilization for all the equipment and storage. So we're hoping when that's freed up, that those conversations are renewed and we can move forward with that. We have a lot of areas, and I'm not going to have my staff look at some of the precincts which are really low income, at poverty level, and figure out where those are, because I really think that we ought to be focusing on the people who have or the neighborhoods in which are more impoverished than others and more in need. And maybe those ought to be that could be a priority of the district. I don't know, but it's certainly a priority of mine.
Thank you. Anita.
Well, I just want to applaud you, Ben, for bringing that up. And so does Historic Downtown Oak Grove, a 501c3 that's really been advocating for that park to happen at New Urban. But what you say, Paul, also has a lot of meaning about seeing areas that are not only deficient in parks, but are low income areas deficient in parks and prioritizing those. So both those things that you've said are great. I appreciate it.
Right. And to add a little side note to that, one of the communications that went in about the concern about the slowdown at Concord, et cetera, specifically mentioned there's a brand new gym paid for by taxpayer dollars sitting there next to the piece of land spoken of. And to the degree that I'll speak as we as taxpayers pay for everything, virtually everything that the school district gets one way or the other, one set of taxes or another, and parks, virtually every part, county. So the same taxpayers are paying for it. To have them be siloed and or not available to the taxpayers for use, as long as it doesn't impede its primary mission. I've been in other districts in other areas that's much more utilized than I've noticed it here. So I'm a big advocate for not only talking about the park part of it, but also the gym part of it. Brand new, brand spanking gym. And I can't imagine they'll be using it all the time.
We've gotten far afield of our agenda here.
Well, thank you. I was just responding to the comment made before. All right, Heather, you done on that topic and you ready to move to the next one?
Ready for the next one. You guys ready?
Yeah.
So this is just a really quick item, I imagine. Just wanted to circle back to the FCS presentation on STCs. Summary wise, most of you were in attendance, but for those of you who weren't, and what FCS covered in that meeting was just basically the characteristics of SDCs, as well as how they're based in Oregon revised statute. So there's a legal underpinning. They're not arbitrary. The SDC calculations are fairly complex, but essentially there's a couple of different kinds of fees, and they're a common denominator, literally, in terms of the math, is growth. So SDCs essentially pay for the share of things that are getting built and upgraded due to serving growth. They gave an example of a uniform charge if we were to go forward with the uniform methodology versus the zonal. We're a zonal policy today, but in 2018, the SDC steering committee, the DAB was no longer meeting, so the same body met as the SDC steering committee and recommended when in total consensus that zonal policy be pursued. And that's where it really left off. The City of Milwaukee Council of that time also agreed. So if we go forward as a uniform methodology, they gave an example for some initial draft work they did in 2018. That unfortunately, that work got outdated pretty quickly, and that's why we picked it back up. And then they listed the current STC charges. And I think the thing that most demonstrated is that, the charges and the project eligibility, they're going to change every time you update your methodology. And really what we want to get to is a methodology that's based in real numbers and real analysis and is sound and defensible. And so that's why we have this STC process starting now. So I don't know if there's any more you guys want to cover on this item, but that's the summary from Monday.
Thank you. I don't see any hands. Thank you for that. Now we're going to your next piece.
All right, so.
Interim overall capital improvement plan.
Yes, and I will share my screen once again. Okay, can you see this blue screen updating the capital improvement plan? I'm seeing head nods. Okay, great. So this is a slide you may look familiar if you remember, but we overviewed CIPs in the past as part of a larger kind of orientation. Essentially, they're a tool. They're a tool to help implement the system plan, and they're one tool. They list the priority projects for the district that can be eligible for SDC funding. And they also, the CIP list can list projects for, I misspoke, for SDC funding and non-SDC funding. They also estimate costs and indicate the SDC eligibility. So capital improvement plans are really important. Our current one needs an update. So these are updated periodically, kind of depends on what jurisdiction and what type of agency. Typically, they're more substantially updated after a long range plan update. And so we have the 2007 CIP adopted in tandem with the 2007 SDC ordinance and methodology, which is quite a ways ago now. Starting in 2014, we had several iterations updating that, primarily because we had a draft plan and some other developments, but it was not formally adopted. Regular updates, they do not need to wait for a new long-range plan, but a new long-range plan almost always comes with an updated CIP to put the two in synchronicity. It's very common to see a 5-year CIP list, which is quite different than the CIP list we've had in the past. And that's something we can talk about here in a few minutes. The significant future CIB update that we plan to do is going to be based on the updated system plan, but we need to do the system plan first. And it leaves us with a little bit of a gap where we have quite an old methodology right now and quite an old CIP list. So what we want to do now is do an interim CIP update and essentially bridge the gap. We want to guide this fully revised one once we have the system plan done, and have really great guidance from our system plan, because it'll give us new priorities and goals to really help us decide what projects should be on that 5 or 10-year CIP list, however we end up deciding we want to do that. So this interim CIP is needed for primarily 2 reasons. One is we do need a total project cost and a list for the 2021-22 SDC methodology update that we kicked off publicly with you on Monday. So the CIP list will really help underpin the methodology. We also want to ensure that the CIP list has any projects that we will be working on that would be normally eligible for SDC type of funding under Oregon revised statute. So a perfect example is the Concord School. We acquired it back in 2018. It's not on our CIP list, and yet we're working on it. So it makes a lot of sense to get that on the list. It doesn't mean we have to do, the huge overhaul that we want to do after the system plan. So having an interim CIP list gets us a long way, and it doesn't mean we can't, do a more significant overhaul in line with the system plan in 2 years-ish. Whoops. Oh, pardon me. So we're going to look at 2 things here in a moment. I'm not going to dwell too long on these slides because I want to actually bring up these sheets that were in your packet. The 2018 revised CIP list is what we're picking up right now. So I want you to understand what that was built on. It was built in part on the 2007 adopted master plan. There were a lot of projects that weren't complete yet. I was also based on the 2015 draft master plan, which had identified a lot of places where we can basically better meet the needs of the district and fill gaps. And that's a very shorthanded way of summarizing all of the things that were recommended in that plan. It also removed Happy Valley projects because Happy Valley was on its way out of the district, even though it ended up taking a couple more years after that point. It reflected the addition of the acquired school properties in 2018. It updated the cost estimate significantly in line with the current market conditions. And as part of responding to the master planning documents, it added a lot of placeholder projects. So maybe it was a neighborhood park number 1, number 2, or number 3. It wasn't necessarily something we had land or money for, but the desire at that time was to put it on the list. This was prepared primarily in order to support the SDC methodology at that time, but it did not assess funding availability or property availability or even overall project feasibility. And I think one of the things that's just kind of interesting to put our lens on now is it did not address, whether it was, say, a short-term, medium-term, or long-term project. So that's part of the lens we wanted to bring now in 2021. So the 2021 interim CIP draft, again, we'll look at this in a moment. It's really trying to take a lens to, what should be on this list? What do we need to work on now? What is most feasible and ready? What it does first off is this kind of cut we're taking at it. It assumes that all projects can still be important in meeting the district's needs long-term. And until we do a system plan, we can't really get at that more specifically. It does remove the zones to reflect a uniform methodology for the SDCs. It indicates the relative project readiness and feasibility. And by feasibility, I mean, really, does it have the momentum and does it have any kind of near-term or projected funding to potentially move it forward? It updates cost on some projects, but we haven't updated all the costs yet because this is your first look at it and we wanted to get it out to you quickly. And also, one thing that's really important to understand is that the projects on the list may or may not be able to be funded in the short, medium, or long term. Funding is very limited. So because it's on the list, it's recognizing that it's been identified as an important need. It doesn't mean that there's funding for it. So I'm going to turn to those lists in just a moment, but I did want to let you know about the steps that come after this. So tonight we have our first discussion on it. And then January, we are able to potentially move forward to a DAC recommendation, which would merely be, do we want to use this list in some modified way for the SDC methodology update? And even if we use the list we recommend in January for the update, it doesn't mean once we see the update and what the result is, that we can't go back and tweak the list. So for example, we may find out that the size project list we have has a significant impact on the methodology, and maybe we should think about making some tweak to it. I can't tell you those answers yet because the methodology is too complex for us to guess at what the perfect project list would be. So we're going to do our best, again, picking up the 2018 list, showing you this lens we put it on tonight, and then putting it into the methodology. So your recommendation to move forward on that will be really, really instructive. By May, we'll be syncing this with the SDC methodology. So by May, we hope to have the board adopt the SDC ordinance. Well, we would have the recommendation from DAC to have the board adopt the SDC ordinance with the methodology and the CIP list. And then there's a lot of public notice that's required in that process. So it'll be quite some time before it would actually go to the board for final adoption. So that's the context. And I did want to just pause there. And I'm going to just flip forward to the actual list, but I'll pause there and just see if there's any questions about the overall gist of the CIP.
Yes, Deborah, please go ahead.
Well, I have questions / concerns about the role of the DAC and all this. Looking at it today, it's really difficult for me, maybe not for everybody, but for me to get some kind of sense about this and what kind of recommendations I would conceivably make. So it seems to me like we need a much larger discussion about what's going on here, since the CIP is so important and affects funding and everything. So we're going to be discussing this in January. What are we going to be discussing in January?
Well, I think the intention tonight was to discuss to the degree that people have questions and we have time to discuss it tonight. And if we're ready to make a recommendation to move something forward to the consultant for the methodology. I will add to this specifically to address your concern, Deborah, and any others who may be feeling similar, is it's a lot. And really what we're trying to do with this interim CIP list is we're not trying to recreate the wheel. We really want to revamp this list in line with the new system plan in the next 18 to 24 months. What we want to do today is do our best at picking up where we left off in 2018, ideally making some thoughtful, maybe putting some thoughtful filters on it, but then moving it forward into the methodology so we can sort of see what impact that has on our SDC methodology.
Well,
go ahead.
Speaking for myself, I wouldn't remotely be ready to make any kind of recommendation at our next meeting. And it seems to me that we need a much larger discussion and context for this 2021 interim CIP.
Remember, Deborah, this is interim in the sense of we've got two main things that we need to have unupdated list. We recognize this is not the list that is going to be the one that I've talked about even in past meetings, where the community can nominate CIP projects and and there's scoring and weighting and public involvement. That's coming 18 to 24 months down the road. We have to have a list that has been adopted so that we can actually calculate the SDC methodology calculations, because the SDC folks can't do their job without knowing what this body has listed as priorities. So that's why we started with the 2018 list, and the group could decide to put that whole list forward exactly as it is, or you could add or subtract things from there. But again, remember, this is only really to get things like the Concord project on, and then to be able to have the SDC methodology move forward, not trying to rush people through the full updated, fully vetted list, which is in the future. This is a temporary get us through that time until we can start that new lift as part of the systems plan.
Well, I guess maybe I would be more, well, I'm still not comfortable making any kind of decision about this at this point in time, but maybe a draft instead of interim.
It can be drafted at this point. It will need to be finalized in time to adopt for the SDC methodology. But I think in part to address your question, Deborah, and it is a lot. And normally when we do a CIP, a full CIP update, we will be going through a lot of background on how the projects got on here and what the criteria were. For this, we're really just picking up on the past work that had been discussed by the previous DAB. So we're trying to honor the process that's gone before without, totally changing everything, but only as an interim measure. Now, it might help for me to flip to that 2021 filter. So in front of us on the screen is the 2018. It might help for me to flip forward to the 2021 and just explain why that looks different, because substantially it's mostly the same, but it's just organized differently. Grover?
Yeah, I actually like to speak similar to what Deborah had to say. I'm in favor of whatever we need to do the SDC methodology update. And I understand they have to have stuff, and I understand it's changeable, but it was the comment about well, we want to honor what the DAB said before and so on and so forth. Part of the reason we've gone through the 2 years to now it's almost 3 years to realign what we have for a district advisory committee is to have a broader representation throughout the entire district. And so things may have been sitting on there for years, and that doesn't mean they should stay on. And I don't want to speak for Deborah, but I concurred with, just because it's been on a list, by what means are we meeting the criteria as the DAC to be able to make recommendations based on specifically the challenge, desires, and needs of all district residents? That's a clearly defined role that we have. And I don't know that they were put on the list and meet that criteria. So if what we're talking about is an SDC methodology, that's great. But if we're still going to get to look at how do we prioritize what's on this list, the ones that are in action right now, I'm not trying to stop any of those, but what's next and what's next and what's next, I think we as a group need to have a more engaged process of being able to look at that based on what the needs of the entire district are. And so I wouldn't be comfortable to say, yep, this looks good to me, except that, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a list that could be used for the SDC methodology without locking in, these are the priorities other than the very close term projects. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And that was the point. Thank you, Grover, for bringing that up. That was the point that I was going to make is no matter what action we take, and because what we're asking you to do in January is not to approve this list as is. What we're asking you to do in January is to agree that this list in whatever form, and again, Heather's going to show you the way we broke it out into kind of short-term, long-term, et cetera. But do we agree that we can use that form or this list for the SDC methodology? And if it's the whole list, great. If it's part of the list, whatever. When the FCS folks start coming back to you all with the examples and kind of plugins, so you can see how things move around, that's where Heather spoke to. You could go in and you could add things, you could take things away. But we're trying to get the list that FCS can use initially. And part of that list, we're wanting to be in whatever form it takes, the Concord project being on there, so that again, it's actually eligible for SDC funding. So if I think it'll come clear how our minds were working on this short-term interim list if Heather shows us the first sheets of those.
Okay, want to clear out
But Anna had her hand up, and so did.
yeah, but I just want to, Deborah, are you done? Because your hand didn't go down. And if you are, I'll move to
I
Anita.
guess, well, I guess my hand can go down. It's sort of confusing, maybe the title of this list, because it wasn't clear that this is a draft for the purposes of constructing the SDC methodology.
This is the direct copied list from the 2018 list. The next list you'll see, the one that we're proposing is reflective. But again, we chose the word interim.
I'm looking at the 2021 list. That's what I'm focusing on. And well, I guess hopefully in January, we'll have a clearer description of this, and it's more clearly stated that this is for the purpose of and not an interim CIP list. Having been, I guess maybe interim is a different meaning, because I was interim chair of a academic department for over 2 years. It means something different to me.
Well, and maybe for defining interim in this sense, this was in fact, I believe this terminology was recommended by Commissioner Salvis when we were trying to come up with what to call this. It's interim in the sense that we are recognizing by calling it interim that this is not a final plan. This is a mid-step plan to get us to where we need to get going before we can get to the final plan.
Correct. And it's got the word draft in it too, right after interim CIP 2021 draft updating. So it's still a draft.
Okay.
Okay, Anita.
I agree with Deborah that it is a challenge to feel like you could make a valuable recommendation. One thing that would help me is if we had an inventory map by sub area of all the land we own and all the parks that are already there, and in detail about each park and what kind of amenities they have, and just see the whole district really clearly on a really big map would be great. And also, if we identified some goals, like I'm thinking of the Trust for Public Land or the Milwaukee Parks Foundation, they both expressed the goals of having neighborhood parks so that people within, half a mile or a mile, everybody's covered, that they have a neighborhood park. I mean, that's just an example of a goal. What are our, if we could identify what goals we want to achieve with this system plan, would be great.
And,
Right.
oh, sorry. May I respond, Grover?
Yeah, please.
I think what Anita's articulating is really important. And that really is why we need to move forward on the system plan, because that is the process to really do that work to identify the new goals. Our old goals they're old. I mean, in planning lifetimes, they're old. They're from 2000, from our 2007 master plan. So, or CIP rather, and 2004 master plan. So part of why we want to do the comprehensive update with very extensive mapping, goals, et cetera, is because we can really devise the right long-term lists then, or call it a 5-year. Maybe we have a 5-year CIP list, but then a longer list of capital projects that we want to do in the long term. And those don't have to be the same thing, but we're not there yet. That's why we need to do the interim one to kind of get us, bridge us to that time when we can really do that comprehensive update.
Yeah, thank you. And I actually appreciate myself that this is a step draft to get us over to that. And I appreciate where you want to go with it. I also, though, want to suggest this is supposed to have a column that says what sub area each one of these projects is in. So don't need it for this minute, but sub areas and how we are distributing across the entire district is one of my goals. And I don't think I'm the only one who has that goal. So until we know how that plays out, doesn't stop us for now, but in the next iteration, the map that Anita spoke of with the details and how much expenditures each of them takes and so on and so forth. And so where are the empty areas and which of these things on the CIP list fall in which sub area?
And again, all of this is great conversation, and we appreciate the concerns. I want to just caution, the reason that we're bringing it to you forward in this way as an interim plan, using the old 2018 plan, is because we have to get something available to FCS. So if we delay,
that was very clear. That's very clear. That's not a question. It's in whatever next things get added on. I just don't want to have those things not be in the forefront.
Yeah, that is definitely in that future, the full plan. That is all criteria that we're looking at.
Okay. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. You know, one thing I just want to say for sake, if there is an ask to go to the voters for whether it's a levy or, to fund some projects, or it's a reformation of the district for a higher tax base. It'd be nice to demonstrate, and on one hand, politically, that you've got projects in the capital plan that meet the needs. I think that kind of Grover was kind of talking about, that are at least spread out across the district in an equitable way, number one. And number two is, if you don't have any capital projects, you probably don't have much call for any SDC rates. So I'm just kind of curious. I wasn't able to attend your meeting Monday night because I had a conflict, but I'm just kind of curious, if you had a very, very large CIP, would that factor into a recommended SDC rate that'd be more favorable to the district? I would assume yes.
There would be more what to the district?
Favorable.
No. And that was one of the points that was made, is it's a bit counterintuitive. And Heather, I'll let you jump in here if I get this wrong. But essentially, when they're calculating the eligibility, they're taking the number that we give them as what we intend to spend in the whatever time period we give them, and they're taking that number and they are factoring what our eligibility is based on the size of that number. Now they can't give us exact amounts, but essentially the larger amounts that you've got in a CIP list, the more spread out it's got to be throughout, and it's gonna result in potentially lower eligibility across the board. And so that was one of their conversations, is to look at the size of our CIP list. And I have a couple of thoughts on that I don't need to talk about at this point, of what we're looking at as a CIP list versus what we're looking at as a needs or a resource needs list, which those two could be different, because there's a lot of things that should be on a CIP list, for instance, that aren't. Typically on a capital improvement list are things like park a year improvement program, so that you're going through and replacing a park or a playground every year. It's a forward funded maintenance based capital project, but typically those things are included. Infrastructure, long-term maintenance projects are usually factored out into capital projects. We just don't do that right now, and we haven't. This CIP list has been really much more of a needs list and a resource list of priorities, but not really prioritized other than these are all the things that are needed, not necessarily with an eye towards what could we accomplish in the next 5 years of a CIP list or 10 years of a CIP list. So Heather.
That is a really good point and a good way to address that question. I think one of the one of the, if for those of you that were at the presentation, you might remember Doug joking about that Band-Aid graphic. So it's not just that it's not just that there's dollars on a CIP list. It's that if you have so much on your CIP list that you're not just addressing growth, you're actually increasing your level of service for the future. That's a good goal. And we should be aspiring to do that as a system and finding ways to do that with our financial structure. However, for the purposes of the SDC, that can be tricky because SDCs don't pay to increase your level of service. They pay to serve growth. And so it's so counterintuitive, but it can be helpful to have a list that's actually a little bit smaller and we're addressing more of the, I would say the near, I guess what I've called them here, the near and medium term projects. And it doesn't mean you let go of everything on the list. It can still be a capital project list or an asset development list without being the capital improvement plan. So there can be multiple things going on at the same time that all serve our planning functions.
Is that complete for you, Commissioner Savas?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Ben?
Yeah, I wanted to just, something that Commissioner Savas said about, going out to the voters and having two big regional parks that are kind of on the list right now, one Milwaukee Bay, the other Concord, two very separate, or not separate, but different geographical regions in our district, I think will be and would have been great confidence builders in our constituents. It got me really concerned the last week or two when we had those meetings or presentations where the budgets weren't there to support the park and some of those efforts. And I hope that, there's the momentum there that can figure out how to recreate that momentum to build confidence in our district on both the south and the north end, because that's what's really going to spearhead people's wanting to vote. That's one thing. And then another thing, I wanted to just acknowledge that, our board has been on hiatus for a very long time. And in the interim, people have been working and getting things moved along, and we're just kind of getting up to speed. So this stuff is really complicated. And I hope we don't, get too far in the weeds to slow down good progress, because slowing down good progress costs money and we all know that we don't have a lot of money to work with. So if there's any way that you all can, like in all these project lists, I know there's lots of momentum in some projects and like zero momentum in some that haven't started yet. Just to acknowledge that, there's already been tax dollar resources put into some of these efforts. So I don't, as a board member, don't want to slow down good progress, because we meet once a month, sometimes twice, like we did this time. So we're not nearly in the day-to-day landmines as you all are. So I want to put some trust in you all, that you all are doing good work, because I do trust you all.
Thank you, Ben. And yeah, I hope it isn't a matter of demonstrating mistrust. It's more about demonstrating, from my point of view, things we don't know about, and you covered that as well. Thanks. You ready to press on, Heather?
I am. I did want to just do a time check out of consideration of your membership. So I can quickly just tell you sort of the lens behind this list and the very minor changes we made just to make it understandable. Do you want to take 2 to 3 more minutes for me to do that?
Having read the list pretty extensively, I don't know what you could tell me that would make me see any different. So I feel free.
Really to summarize, I mean, hopefully everybody, if you haven't had a chance to go through your packet to that level of detail, you can after this, but we really didn't do much to the list other than we removed a few projects that had been completed already or were no longer relevant. Right. And Heather added the Justice property as a a project because we felt that needed to be on there in a short or medium term. And then really our recommendation is to look at this top 2 tiers as something to consider. When you look at the total dollar amount that's listed here for all of these projects, it's $216 million. There's no amount of bonding that we would do in the next 30 years probably to come anywhere close to that. So our thought was, just like we'll be looking at the future CIP list and the capital outlay list as stuff that's actually fundable and achievable in time periods, is we look at just the projects that we felt were the most feasible or were already underway, and then those projects that were actually tied to a named property in the plan. So if it was a park or a property that we already have, that was that second tier. So keeping all of those as priorities, because again, we understand there was a lot of discussion on what was included in 2018. And then that bottom tier, that last list, were those placeholder ones that Heather had talked about. And I totally do not want to lose those as priorities, but I would argue, based on the information we got from the CIP or from the SDC consultants, to remove those and list those as project priorities, or even as I believe maybe Deborah or Anita had spoken to, of essentially creating a list of goals where instead of having 6 parks in this area and 6 parks in this area, we have a goal that when land becomes available in any area of the district, we consider it and how it would benefit the district residents and that particular area or neighborhood. Same thing with natural areas, same thing with trails. Those are the basic and sports fields. Those are the basic placeholders that are there. And we don't want to do away with that, but we recommend potentially looking at those top 2 lists, which equal right around $100 million, I believe, if we were to just look at trying to complete some of those. But again, this is more of, we just want to get a list updated that includes Concord, Justice property, remove some of the stuff that was no longer relevant, and allows us to move forward. It's really the level of what you would want to have on that to have SD or FCS start making their calculations, or a completely different list and delay the project.
Okay. Well, let's speak to the timeline that we do have. It's 2 minutes to our scheduled end time. I'm willing to stay on. We have public comment and then the report and division report, director's report, and we're done. So, but as far as going through this list in any greater detail, we're going to see it again before we need to speak of it. And if I understand correctly, the main focus is to allow the SEC crew to go along and get some stuff up for us. And then the other part for me is, as if you saw in the chat, Commissioner Savas pointed out, not to have this conversation now, but we need to look at, with the several new zonings and the House Bill 2001, there's going to be a lot more, hopefully in the near future, density in certain areas. And are we looking at that so that we're not locked into just on a geographic map, but really look at what the needs of the populations are, which there's tons of stuff that I still want to look at. And then the funding and where are we spending our money now, and not having that conversation, but those all need to be had before we can really put our priorities. We have to figure out how much we got and what are the priorities based on factors that we're not yet looked at. So does anybody need to go? Your time is up. You are free to do whatever you choose to do, but I assert I'd like to keep going with the meeting. If there's staff that are hanging on that don't need to be there, it'd be fine with me. It's up to you, Mike. They're your staff, but if they need to depart, but I'd like to finish out the meeting and move into public comment. Any objections?
I do. I have a 6-year-old that I have to put to bed and eat dinner with. And so like to continue on with this meeting without me. I know I've been kind of present, kind of absent because he had capoeira class tonight. I'd like to, I don't know, table this and come back to it because, I have my own family obligations tonight. So I don't know how that works.
Well, if I understand, thank you for that, and I certainly respect you taking care of your family. I think as long as we still have a quorum, we can continue. We're not going to make any decisions. So, and yet to have all this wait until next time, and we did say we'd have public comments, we have to see how that goes. So
Before
truly,
Desi leaves, I want to ask, do we have the ability to vote to approve the list to move forward with FCS tonight?
I don't
Is
think that was
is
on
there
the
a
agenda as
question?
an item to be done. It's not on the agenda to do that.
If it's not on the agenda, can I request that that is a vote that we can make while Desi is here? Because the information has been presented to us, and they're on the dime. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, are they ripe to start doing this work and need the approval to move forward?
Yes, they do need it. I mean, we can wait until January to give them that information.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to have them move forward with this work, knowing from what they said, the system plan is going to be done. So there are opportunities for us to tweak what's going to happen. I just feel like we need to make progress and not slow things down. And I feel like a lot of work has been done with the district to formulate this list, and it's been there a long time. So I would like to make the motion to approve this list for the STC methodology process to move forward.
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and now time for discussion. And I'd like to start off with discussion. Does that motion then in fact make this list approved for anything other than STC calculations? Because that's the motion that was made. And if we're clarifying, and I need some clarification from those who know more than me, but if that's the only part of it, it's only so that they can move forward, and adjustments later made to the list will not significantly affect the calculation process that they're going to beginning. It still can be fine-tuned. I need to hear some clarification, and the people I would look to is Commissioner Savas. Do you know?
I don't know the answer. If I understood the question, I don't know the answer if we can change this afterwards or not. Sounds like they need something. If this is something to get them started, great. But what I don't know here tonight, I didn't see it in the packet. I didn't see this in the packet. Maybe, again, I lost it or I'm looking at the wrong packet. But my assumption was that, you were going to add things to this list. Staff was going to add things to the list that aren't there, like Concord and others.
No,
Or
Concord, the three schools were all on there. The only one that we added that wasn't on there that we wanted to add based from there was the Justice property.
Yeah,
But the schools that are all but on there, we just hadn't had it adopted.
okay.
And the Justice was a substitution. It basically just took the place of one of the generic listed neighborhood parks because we have that land already today. I will say I will just clarify that what we give FCS will be fed into their draft. So it would be the next step to have them plug and chug something different would be to look at it after it's run and say, hey, let's look at something different, or let's give them a revised list. And one of the things that I'm very cognizant of as someone who's been trying to work with this existing list is we would need to do some work to, if not completely rebuild cost estimates, we'd need to do a cost escalation factor on those projects for which we don't have specific cost estimates, like Concord that is coming, or like Milwaukee Bay Park. And that would affect the numbers as well. So we would need to be doing that work also with any sort of revision. So for example, if we went forward with the methodology with the list that you see here, plus or minus the orange, we know that we'd want to at least make revisions to those cost figures as a staff.
And is it taking us down the wrong path to know that those changes, or is it better to let them do a certain amount of work such that it moves it forward, and then we can adjust based on what they come back with. That's piece one. Piece two, in your document, Heather, it says actions requested. No action is requested this time. Staff is seeking comment and input from the DAC as stakeholders. So, but it says specifically in bold, no action. So I'm concerned that now this is in fact what was wanted. I'm a bit confused.
Well, the motion as it was made was specifically to allow for SDC calculations. There's nothing that says that in any of that that would restrict, that says that this is now your CIP list. Whether it's done today or as we had intended, to have you make some sort of a recommendation at next month's meeting. Again, it's not to create a fully vetted CIP list. This is to get an interim update so that we can get the items on the list that adopted that need to be on there for SDC purposes and for the SDC calculations. So the motion as it stands is not restrictive, saying that this is the only list. It was specific to SDC calculation.
Correct, but I want to make sure it is not the only list. That's not the point, that this list is solely for them to do that. And my question is, are they wasting their time if a significant number of this, again, because we don't know what zones they are, we don't know what the needs are, all of those things would need to be addressed for us to do the tasks that we've been assigned and have been working on for the last 6 months. So to approve this list, it's approved for using this list for calculating SDC methodology, and it is in no way locking in the list, and it is not a big deal to make changes to it as it moves down the line, because otherwise I have a lot of difficulty. It says draft, but now we're saying we're going to approve it. I'm back to Deborah and her comment. And this is the discussion. So this is what this is for. This is the time. I would like anyone else who has a thought here to speak up in the discussion, because it's been moved in second and a vote will need to take place. Yes, Anita. And then Deborah.
I guess
Go ahead.
I keep feeling like I want to turn to Heather and say, would she recommend that we do this to give to FCS right away? Because I feel confused. I don't know how to judge this motion, how to judge the vote.
You know, if it was just up to me, and it's not, my recommendation would be to move forward with the A's and the B's, the green and the yellow, in order to basically see how that moves forward through the methodology, knowing that we can revise that. Once we see that, we can go back and do a revision. Obviously, we don't want to do revisions ad nauseum. It's a consultant's time and it's a lot of effort on you guys. But I think that would be, you know, definitely a possible first step. And whether we do that tonight or whether we update costs first and, you know, do that in January, I'll defer to Mike if he has an opinion on that.
No, our original intent was to do that in January. I still think that's reasonable. But I don't think you would be doing any harm by taking action tonight for the future revision ability of the list. You'll still be able to add things and remove things if you so desire of this interim list. And again, we'll be re-efforting the whole thing in about 12 to 18 months, probably starting.
Well, this reminds me of approving the budget, and that, yes, well, we're not really approving the budget, but if you want to make changes, you can make changes later, but you'll have to do a special effort to do that. I'm a bit concerned or confused. Are we in fact approving this list only for the purpose of using it to move forward? That's a part has not, and Heather didn't answer that in specific, nor has anyone. Deborah, go ahead.
Well, I think the motion was stated something to, for the purposes of SDC revision. I'm okay with that. If the motion says for the purposes, this list is for the purposes of SDC revision, I think we can deal with that.
Thank you.
Come back,
Ben, oh,
subs-
sorry. Go ahead, Deborah. Didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you were done. Go
No,
ahead. Ben,
Yeah, you know, when I was specifically talking about this list, the dollar values of the projects, I recognize we've been in a very volatile market and inflation has been 5% a year. So it wasn't necessarily, you know, talking about the exact dollar value pinned to every project, but in general, like this list in general, if you all feel like looking at the dollar value for each of the projects makes sense because some of the cost estimates have been done several years ago, I think that really is logical to do. And if I need to amend my motion, I will do so if that makes sense. Like I will amend my motion to move this list forward with what Heather said, with like really focusing on the A and B to get the SCC methodology moving forward, but also just looking at the overall cost too based on inflation. That's how I will amend the motion. If that is, I'm not an expert on Robert's rules of order. Am I allowed to do that?
As long as it's seconded.
Okay.
correct. But my reply to that, just to be clear that I'm understanding what you're saying, this is not just about a CIP list and the dollar amount's going to change. I don't know that this fits our priorities either. That's the part that is my biggest concern. And that didn't get clarified in your amendment.
Okay, so I'll add an amendment to my amendment that it is really a study, not necessarily casting in stone which projects would be on the CIP.
I think we'll get it all set out here in a bit, but I appreciate that. And so now you're looking for a second.
Yes.
And Joel, did you want to speak
I'll
to that?
second
or speak to
again.
something?
I will second again. That was actually precisely what my suggestion was maybe going to be to Ben in the spirit of the discussion, is to amend his motion to maybe account for updating the numbers. But it really, I'm looking at this and I'm seconding this only as approving this as a tool that is needed in not being a definitive list. I think we've talked that in circles. I agree with you, Grover, and Deborah as well on the points made on that. I think I'm looking at this as the utility of the list to, why delay it another month? I think we can move forward with this comfortably now with those updated numbers, if that's what Ben is actually amending his motion to.
Okay, thank you. So it's been revised and moved and seconded, and Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, one thing I found it. I had the budget document open and not this packet open when I made the statement. I couldn't find it, so I'm sorry for that. As I'm looking at the numbers, I'm just looking at the numbers you've stated recently here. As we both know that the item number, I don't know what number it is. There's no numbers on it, but the Concord Elementary site, it's listed here at 14 million. Is that a realistic number?
No, that's what Heather said, is if you move forward with this list, she's going to go in and revise numbers based on our current knowledge. So this, what you see here is purely, other than the justice one, is purely what the numbers were reflected in 2018. We did not go forward and update these numbers yet.
Only the numbers in the double boundaries here that we knew
Right.
were different, like Milwaukee Bay Park, and where we had some other figures, but we didn't systematically go through an update. So only the ones in that border are updated based on specific project estimates.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly, the 14,000, it's closer to double that, isn't it? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I
don't
have a vote in this. I'm only a liaison for y'all. But I do like what Heather said. If the intent is what Heather said, and that is as basically the interim or the first run of the SDC looks, with an opportunity to revise it as needed for the second, perhaps final run, of the SDC methodology, I think that might give everyone comfort if that's the intent.
So is Jessica the person who's keeping track of what the motion is? Because she's taking
I
the
sure hope
notes?
so. I lost track.
Me too. Jessica, are you there and you ready to shine, or was it not clear that that's what you might be doing?
Yeah, if we could maybe repeat the motion, I got a little confused in there.
Oh, do I have
Okay.
to do that?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I wish I was taking notes on what I said. The motion is to move forward with this list as for projects for SDC methodology. Not necessarily based on what their current dollar value is, but reassessing their current value based on inflation and what the district knows about their current project prices. But moving forward, for the sake of moving forward for SDC methodology, for the project list, not the dollars.
A and B.
A and B.
Right, right. This list A and B, but the other part that we had in there, that this is not based on a priority of ultimate priority. If it's an A and B, it's most likely already included, and we have a chance to move stuff around, and the dollar amount will be updated before you give it to them. Is that what I heard you say, Heather? Okay, so to move forward this draft CAP list, items A and B are marked A and B for STC methodology updating. So it's not approving it as a CIP list going forward. It's for that purpose only. Did I capture it, or do you want to change it again?
No,
Is that adequate for what you said, Ben?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay. Anybody else want to fine tune what I said? Joel, is that okay with you as a second? Okie dokie. Any further discussion? Yes, Anita.
Yeah, I'm still kind of stuck looking at the yellow list and wondering how much it serves our new goal or our current goal of equity throughout the district. I haven't mapped out where all these places are. Some of them are big ticket items, some of them are very small. And I just feel like it's too soon for me to give any kind of stamp of approval to this when I haven't really looked at how it plays out over the whole district and in terms of, yeah, all that. So I think I'll have to abstain.
You could abstain or you could say nay.
True.
It just
feeling
changes the
I have-
number.
The feeling I have is abstaining.
Well, actually, given the issue that, I know it's getting later, folks, but given the issue is, because somebody's got Milwaukee, I just dropped my papers, so they're not in order anymore, but it was like $20 million, North Clackamas Parks, just under $20 million. And that's about speculating on buying more property and so on and so forth. So we're not fitting so we have plenty of room to readjust the list. This is something for the SCC people to focus on, and we're not wasting a lot of money like with the Concord project. We spent $1.2 million, and now it's going to take another third of that to consider going forward at best. So that's clear, right? Heather, I need you to nod because you're the one who knows that best. Okay, good. Got it. Any other further discussion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. There's probably a script around here, but the long and short of it is, Jessica, could you poll the membership?
Yeah.
Or the DAC?
Anada,
Abstain.
Ben,
Aye.
David,
Aye.
Deborah,
Aye.
Desi,
Aye.
Jan,
Aye.
Joel,
Yes.
Maureen,
Are you speaking, Maureen?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I,
Thank you.
thank you.
Trevor.
Under the understanding, yes. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yeses and 0 no's and 1 abstention. The motion passes to move forward this draft CIP list A's and B's for SDC methodology updating with updated approximate numbers, yeah? Okay, very good. That closes that part out. Anything else for your part, Heather?
No, thank you, guys. This is meaty stuff. And we're going to continue to work our way through this. So this isn't your last chance to talk about CIP, not even close. So thanks for hanging in there.
Good. Okay. Jessica, do we have anyone in the public that wants to comment?
Nobody has submitted anything in the Zoom chat, and I don't see anyone with their hand raised at this time.
Very good. Giving 5 more seconds. Moving on. Okay, DAC member reports. Anyone want to raise their hand for that? We're getting efficient here. No hands, moving right along. The division reports.
I didn't have anything to add to those unless anybody had any questions. It's been a busy time if you read through all the things going on.
Correct. And thank you for sending that out in advance. That was great. I did have one question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead, Joe.
Gro, I was just going to jump on your tailcoats there. I really appreciate the division report. The format and everything's terrific. I like seeing those and looking forward to seeing those on the packets. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Me too. There was one item in there that talks about the annual report, and I just wanted to know what was the timeline on that you expect? And I understand there's new format and everything, so I'm looking forward to what that's going to be. But
yeah, the format, it's less the format and more. We had to wait until the audit was finished before we could put audited numbers in the report. So that just happened. We wrapped that up. So I'm hoping to have that to you in January.
Great, thank you. All righty. Anything else from the division report section and director report?
I had a few things, but I'm just going to distill it down to a couple. We have a couple of vacancies I'd like the DAC to be aware of. The first, we didn't have a chance to talk about it before, but Luca Dorito needs to resign due to work conflict. He has gotten a promotion and can't commit to the meetings. So he's going to remain on our budget committee, which is great. We'll have him involved in some way, but he just can't make the meetings. So we're working with PGA, Public and Government Affairs, on how the recruitment happens with that. His term, I think, expires in 2025. So we'll have more information on that. And then we also have a vacancy on our budget committee. The nomination or the application period is open right now through PGA, and it closes January 7th. So if you know anybody that would like to serve on the budget committee, that would be great as well. And then the only other note I had on here is we do not have a specific date yet. We just had our meeting about it today. But we are looking at having a combined DAC Oak Lodge task force meeting sometime in probably mid to late January to give everybody an update of where we're at and get some more comments and suggestions. So I don't have a date on that. I don't have any other details other than that is what we think is probably the best next steps so that everybody's getting the same messaging and information. So more information to follow on that. That's all I
Just a
have.
quick clarification. So the Oak Lodge group you're talking, that is the Concord task force?
The task force. Yeah, sorry, the Concord task
Okay.
force. Yeah.
Nope. And it'll be a joint meeting where everybody is panelists and they can all talk. It'll be a big meeting. There's almost, well, I don't think it could take up one seat, and same with a few others. But anyway.
We're gonna ask. I believe her name is Allison, the facilitator that helps with that, to be there to facilitate that meeting. So more details to follow.
Please, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Is there any other business? Seeing none, we are adjourned at 8, was it 56, 7? 6.
7:56.
Oh, yeah, 7, sorry. Looked at the wrong clock.